Back in March of 1964, a 28-year-old bar manager named Kitty Genovese closed up the bar for the night and headed home, walking the quiet streets of her Queens, New York neighborhood. She never made it, becoming instead the victim of one of the most well-known crimes of the 20th century.
She was coming home from work in the middle of the night on the morning of March 13th, a little after 3 in the morning, 1964, and was attacked out of the middle of the night, really the primal human nightmare, it seems to me. Somebody springs out of the darkness and stabbed her. The case became world famous when the New York Times reported 2 weeks later that 38 people had watched this crime take place, had watched Kitty Genovese be killed, and had done nothing.
That's Kevin Cook, author of the book Kitty Genovese, The Murder, the Bystanders, the Crime That Changed America. He says that Kitty was attacked twice over half an hour before help arrived, so the case quickly became emblematic of a nation turned cold-hearted and apathetic.
Kitty Genovese screamed for help. By the time they got to their windows, they're half asleep. It's 3:30 in the morning. She has bravely staggered around a corner out of sight. The murderer, rather than fleeing, waited and attacked her again on the opposite side of the same building at a place where the people who had gone to their windows could no longer see her. So it took a half hour overall before finally the police arrive and it's all over.
However, Cook says the murder of Kitty Genovese didn't happen quite the way the newspapers portrayed it. He says it's likely that only about a half dozen people really could have heard Kitty's screams and actually seen what was going on. And some of them did try to do something about it.
One man lifted his window and shouted, "Leave that girl alone." That's what stopped the first attack, and the killer ran away. The story has always been told that she died alone. She did not die alone. There was a neighbor who was brave enough to run to her side when, for all the neighbor knew, the crime was still going on.
Still, it's true that some people did nothing. For example,
a married couple looked out their window and one of them reaches for the telephone, "I'm going to call the police," and the other says, "Oh, no need. 30 or 40 people must have called the police by now." In fact, the story went no one had. I found out later. I firmly believe at least one person did call the police while the attack was underway.
Psychologists have since come to understand some of the reasons why people refuse to get involved in helping someone else, especially when lots of other people are around. Back in the 60s, it was known as the Kitty Genovese Effect. Today, psychologists call it the Bystander Effect, and Cook says much of their research was prompted by this case.
It led to so much hand-wringing about apathy. What's the matter with our society? How can we stand by and watch without intervening ourselves, without trying to do something right? That's why the case is still studied in psychology textbooks from high school through college. It did lead to a lot of really important research into the bystander effect, and it's a real effect. Kitty and all of the rest of us would be luckier if someone attacks us if there are only 2 or 3 witnesses than if there are a whole bunch of witnesses. If there are a dozen, everyone tends to wait. Who's the bravest in this bunch? Somebody's braver than me, somebody's stronger than I am, someone else will take action. If there's only 2, then the psychological approach seems to be it's going to be me or it's going to be nobody.
Bystander effect is the phenomenon that in emergency situations where people need help, the amount of help that you can expect depends on the number of people watching. And somewhat paradoxically, the bystander effect means that the more people are watching, the less likely it is that someone intervenes, that someone comes to help the victim.
That's Dr. Jan-Willem van Prooijen, Associate Professor of Social and Organizational Psychology at VU University in Amsterdam and Senior Researcher at the Netherlands Institute for Criminology. He's been a researcher in a number of recent studies showing factors that lead people to help out or keep them away.
Throughout the years, we have managed to develop various explanations for this phenomenon. One very important one, I think, is what we call diffusion of responsibility. So that means when other people are watching, our sense of personal responsibility to do something decreases. So we start thinking, why should I intervene? Why not the person standing there or that guy over there seems much stronger? That's one important explanation. Our diffusion of responsibility, our own personal responsibility decreases.
When you're on the highway and everybody's driving, diffusion of responsibility says that bystanders don't accept personal responsibility for helping because they assume somebody else will do it.
Dr. James Strickland is a psychologist in private practice in Comac, New York.
My own personal experience with the bystander effect is when my daughter was 2 years old and she had her birthday party, I was sitting with her at the table, and they brought the cake and it had candles, and they surprised me with it. So I was like, wait, let me go ahead and get my video camera because I got to document everything. And I went to get the camera, and in the interim, I had come back, and my 2-year-old daughter at that time had reached out and grabbed the flame and burnt herself. And that's when I said, how could this have happened? There were a room full of adults.
Strickland says another reason bystanders don't help out when others are around is a concept called pluralistic ignorance.
Essentially, bystanders conclude that it's unnecessary to help because other people around them aren't offering help. They interpret it as, oh, I guess the person doesn't need help.
To give you an example, imagine someone is drowning in a pool or in a lake, and there are several people watching on the side, and no one jumps in. Then we might infer, well, probably that person isn't drowning. That person is probably taking a swim.
Van Proyen says another factor is known as audience inhibition.
That means that when there are other bystanders around, we fear that we might be evaluated negatively when we intervene. So when we feel more watched and therefore are more concerned that we might be doing something wrong by intervening, so to speak.
Some other factors are perhaps more practical and less subconscious. Strickland says a lot of people don't get involved because, as they say, no good deed goes unpunished. They're worried about their personal safety. By the same token, a number of factors can make certain people more inclined to help. One is competence. For example, if someone's having trouble related to a person's area of expertise. Strickland says he once observed a woman clearly in emotional distress aboard a commuter train. No one was helping her. So he stepped forward, showed his psychologist identification, and was able to help calm the woman. He says another factor increasing bystander involvement is if the emergency is unambiguous.
There's a clear and present danger. So if it's well known, it's a fire, it's happening, or perhaps there's a really bad car accident, somebody will make a phone call to the police. Also, if somebody else has already intervened, these people are more likely to help once it gets started. I call that the penguin effect, and I've observed this a number of times watching shows on TV where you see a bunch of penguins huddled up around a hole, and they're all kind of gathered around, and no one's going. But then all of a sudden, that one penguin, whether it be him brave or stupid, jumps into the hole. Then you see all the other penguins going ahead.
Van Proyen's team has found that anonymity is also a major factor in whether bystanders get involved. They tested the theory by having research subjects use a specially designed internet chat room. After a while, the subjects started getting messages from other supposed users asking for help.
Varying problems like relationship breakup, health issues, and we assessed whether or not participants helped in the form of sending a message to them, sending an encouraging message or trying to give some advice. What we varied was two things. First of all, we varied whether or not people were alone on the forum or they thought that there were at that same time 30 other participants, so 30 other people on that specific web forum. And second, we also made them feel watched, for instance, by having a webcam pointed at them.
Van Proyen found that the bystander effect is just as strong on the internet as it is in person, until you turn on the camera.
If there was no webcam, then we find a typical bystander effect. So people helped less when there were more people present on the forum. So basically that's a bystander effect in cyberspace, if you would like. But when people felt watched, for instance by a webcam, when people felt self-conscious, this increases their self-awareness, then we actually found a reversal of the bystander effect, and people actually started helping more when they thought there were other bystanders present. We think that's a really interesting phenomenon because that suggests that making people feel watched increases their concern for their reputation and makes them actually realize that helping can have good benefits for their reputation.
Then the team tried out the power of the camera in person. They set up a help desk with some cash on it. After a research subject entered the room, the desk was briefly left alone by its attendant. Then an actor was instructed to snatch some of the money and turn to leave the room to see if the subject intervened.
We varied whether or not participants were alone with the thief or whether there were two other people standing there. Now, these two other people were actors, and they were given clear instructions: stand there, watch, and do nothing. Besides that, we also varied whether or not there was a security camera hanging in the lab. For half the participants, this camera was there, and the other half, there was no such camera. Now, what did we find? We found that the presence of a camera increased the extent to which people tried to stop the thief.
In fact, the camera increased those efforts to the point that people were just as likely to intervene with others present as they were when they were alone with the thief. Van Proyen was even surprised how courageous subjects were.
If you're alone with the thief and there's no camera, that places pretty much all the responsibility on you. If you don't do anything, then no one will, basically. In that condition, people were about as eager to help in terms of stopping the thief as when there was a camera and other bystanders present. What we think is that the camera serves as an accountability cue. It reminds people that they can be held accountable for what they do or for what they fail to do in such a situation. And I think it makes them more conscious that even when there are other people, they do have a responsibility. Moreover, I also think it makes them more conscious of what they do has an implication for their reputation.
And since everybody knows cameras could be just about anywhere these days, including in someone else's pocket, Van Proyen says it's possible we may start to see a crack in the bystander effect. When we assume without thinking that we're being watched, we may not feel we can slip into the background anymore. It may allow the hero in each of us to emerge. You can find out more about Kevin Cook's book, Kitty Genovese, and information about all of our guests through our website, radiohealthjournal.net. I'm Reed Pence.
The new dietary guidelines for Americans are out, and most of us need to increase the amount of potassium in our diets. In fact, 97% of Americans aren't meeting their daily potassium requirements. However, a new survey by the Idaho Potato Commission finds that fewer than 30% of Americans make an effort to consume potassium every day or know that potatoes are a great place to get it. Here's Toby Amador, registered dietitian and author of The Greek Yogurt Kitchen.
The survey shows that nearly 9 in 10 Americans are aware that bananas are a good source of potassium, but only 27% think this about potatoes. And only 7% of us would incorporate potatoes into meals if they were looking to increase potassium. The truth is that one medium-sized potato with this skin has twice as much potassium as a typical 4-ounce banana, and they're heart-healthy too.
So pass the potatoes, loaded with potassium. Find out more at idahopotato.com.
Red raspberries are tasty and juicy, but studies show they may also be very good for your health. A review of scientific literature in the journal Advances in Nutrition show that components in red raspberries may have anti-inflammatory, antioxidative, and metabolic stabilizing activity. Dr. Britt Burton-Freeman is lead author of the review.
Red raspberries are among the few plant foods that provide a source of allagitannins and anthocyanins in the same package. Their properties shed light on the potential to help reduce factors contributing to metabolic syndrome, which has implications for diabetes development and overall cardiovascular and brain health.
Even when not in season, you can enjoy frozen red raspberries year-round. They're picked at the peak of ripeness to lock in flavor and nutrition. Raspberries are an excellent source of vitamin C and have the most fiber of any berry at 9 grams per cup. To learn more, visit redraz.org.